One was considered the champion of the Jedi Order, who oversaw the Jedi's activities and functions during the Clone Wars, wielding his iconic purple lightsaber, but ultimately bringing down the downfall of the Jedi in the public eye. The other was a Count from Serrano, a former Jedi, one of the Lost, but a skilled practitioner of the Force and a very manipulative and adept politician when needed to be. If you put these two together in battle against one another, who would come out on top? This is the topic for this edition of the Star Wars Lads Versus series. Episode 1, Mace Windu versus Count Dooku. Hi everyone. So this is a little bit of a later weekly special than we usually have on this channel, but I think it was a great time to start this series based on a lot of the feedback that we've been getting in our community tab discussions and polls. So this is the start of a new series called Star Wars Versus. Now for this first episode, I chose Mace Windu and Count Dooku, two very popular and iconic Star Wars characters from the prequel trilogy. A big reason why I wanted to start off this series with these two characters is because they are rumored to have a pretty big role in the Tales of the Jedi episodes that will be dropping sometime in the fall. We know that these two were around each other quite often when Dooku was still a Jedi, and they seem to have a little bit more of a contentious relationship, just based on some of what we've seen in the prequels and some hints that we've gotten in other story formats. So, based on what we know already and the upcoming future for these characters, I wanted to make them the first pairing for this Versus series. If you guys enjoy it, I will definitely continue it in the upcoming months, as there's so many different characters that I want to see interact. This isn't just exclusive to Jedi, it could be bounty hunters, it could be clone troopers, whoever you guys think of being as good matchups. I definitely want to hear from you guys. If not, I'll be dropping my own ideas because I have a few in the bank. Now, I know this is a format that a lot of different people have definitely done on YouTube before, so I'm going to definitely play on a lot of the same things that people compare when they put two characters against each other. But I'm going to also include a bit of a scenario that I can envision having this one-on-one duel between these two. For the categories that we can somewhat objectively rank these characters against, we're going to look at their weapon abilities, we're going to also look at their special abilities, and then we're going to look at other traits. And then I'll put the scenario out here. Now that you know the format for the Versus series, let's get into the first episode. Mace Windu versus Count Dooku. For the first category, this will be on the weapons of choice and their skills with it. Let's begin with Mace Windu. Mace Windu, like almost every Jedi in the prequel era and before, is trained very heavily and from an early on point in lightsaber combat. Like many other Jedi, he's very skilled and very adept, but he is a notable user of Form 7, Vapad. Vapad is a lightsaber combat form that has been brought over from Legends, but for the most part is basically the same. Vapad is the very dangerous 7th form of lightsaber combat, derived from Juyo, which is used by dark side users. Mace Windu is one of the only two known masters of the form that did not fall to the dark side. This form of combat is very aggressive and very dangerous, but it does allow him to be unpredictable and aggressive in combat forms. Mace, being a master of this, is able to combat against dark side techniques and can counter them and basically neutralize anything that comes his way. Some examples of Mace Windu using his unpredictable Form 7 have been against Mother Talzin, fellow Jedi Master Proset Tibbs, and of course the iconic duel against Darth Sidious in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. For the most part, he's a very powerful guy. He's been able to survive many different combat situations, everything from Geonosis to the end of the Clone Wars against the Force Scream of Darth Sidious. In comparison to many of the dark side users and notable Jedi like Anakin and Obi-Wan, Mace Windu wasn't exactly involved in a lot of lightsaber combat during the Clone Wars. But he was a very adept battle commander with his lightsaber. He was very good at deflecting incoming blaster shots back towards the enemy, and we have seen at the very beginning of the Clone Wars his ability to fight against Jango Fett and beheading him, which is pretty impressive because Obi-Wan struggled quite a bit on Kamino against Jango Fett. We've also seen that Mace is able to deflect Force Lightning back, which, while we have seen several Jedi do, is still a pretty difficult task, especially against Palpatine. As a whole, when it comes to lightsaber combat for the prequels, Mace Windu is up there. I do have to give him some slight negative points because he's not actively fighting in lightsaber duels on a frequent basis. He's obviously very skilled and able to handle himself, especially towards the end of the war, but I wouldn't exactly send him to the front line when I have other capable fighters like Obi-Wan and Anakin who fight against so many different blade-based users. If there was ever any Force user who was amazing at lightsaber combat, it would probably have to be Count Dooku. Again, like Mace Windu, trained from a very early age in lightsaber combat, and he was trained specifically by his master, Yoda, who did not take many apprentices during his reign as the Grand Jedi Master of the Order. At the same time, when we look at Count Dooku and a lot of the media that we have, most of it is set towards the end of his life when he's a much older man and not necessarily in his athletic prime as a human. Mace Windu is a bit older as well, but Mace Windu, at least we can see him in his 30s and 40s, and at the very beginning of his 50s. And as a Jedi, he should still be able to prolong his abilities in lightsaber combat and power that comes from it for a very long time. The fact that he also has a pretty unpredictable style also allows him to get away with some traditional and fundamental techniques that might wane in lightsaber combat. That being said, when we look at Count Dooku, where his body might be starting to fail him a little bit, his lightsaber combat is just too technically refined to be ignored. Count Dooku is best known as probably one of the only few users, if not the only user during the prequel era, of Form 2, Makashi. Makashi was a form, at least according to legends, was used heavily when Jedi were known to be in extreme combat situations on a regular basis against dark side users. So, Form 2 was designed to be more used in prolonged battles against other lightsaber and energy blades, and that gives Count Dooku an immediate advantage on almost every single lightsaber user in history. If Dooku was to be transported back to an era where lightsaber combat was the norm, maybe he would just be an above average user, but because most Jedi weren't used to lightsaber combat, and even dark side users weren't really used to live lightsaber combat, Dooku stands head and above almost every single person. It doesn't hurt that Dooku also has a curved lightsaber, which is a very unique design and very cool, which always gives a little bit of a bonus point. Now we can talk about how Dooku is one of the only few users of Makashi, but in truth, it's just the fact that we've seen him defeat a lot of people with this form on a consistent basis that makes him stand very strongly here. He beats Anakin and Obi-Wan regularly throughout the Clone Wars, Attack of the Clones, and for the beginning part of Revenge of the Sith. Obi-Wan especially struggles heavily, even though he is trained by Qui-Gon. Throughout books, comics, TV shows, and whatever else, Obi-Wan is considered to be a strong lightsaber duelist. So the fact that he loses almost every single time against Dooku, and pretty quickly to add to that, is a bit shocking. But it does suggest that Dooku is just that good of a fighter. Anakin Skywalker, being a pretty physical duelist in any era, practiced Form 5, which is known for Xian and Jiu-Jitsu, the two main disciplines. And he was known primarily for the Jiu-Jitsu, which is a lot more of a brutal slashing and hacking motion. And yet, in his advanced age, Dooku is quite able to handle it and parry away a lot of these strikes and force Anakin to be on the defensive in quite a few battles. Dooku also has fought against a lot of his own apprentices. He's fought against Savage Opress, Asajj Ventress, a lot of Night Sisters, Grievous, and he has completely outclassed all of them at every single point in time. Alright, with a little bit of their histories and their skills with their lightsaber combat explained here, I think it's pretty clear that there is an obvious winner here. Mace Windu is a powerful Jedi, and he's proven time and time again that he can use his lightsaber combat pretty effectively against some of the top fighters in the galaxy. That being said, Count Dooku has a lightsaber combat form that is specifically designed for lightsaber duels, and in comparison to Mace Windu, he regularly fights top Jedi in lightsaber combat as well as many dark-side users throughout the period of the Clone Wars. Mace Windu could probably hang with Count Dooku in a lightsaber fight, but on paper, it does seem like Count Dooku would have a very strong advantage to win this whole thing, and pretty quickly as well. For the second category, this will be on special abilities and how they use them. Arguably, Mace Windu might be a step above Count Dooku when it comes to special abilities. While it is true that both of them are very adept in the Force, Mace Windu's mastery is something else. Like many other Jedi, he can push and pull objects at ease, but the weight that he can handle is pretty impressive. We see him on Ryla pushing a whole ATTE down, which For most Jedi, it takes a little bit of strain, but within seconds, he's pushed the whole thing off a cliff. In Attack of the Clones, The Clone Wars, and parts of Revenge of the Sith, we see Mace Windu being able to use the Force to enhance his natural abilities. He's able to jump up very high and cover ground pretty immediately, and he's notable for having quick speed, which he uses effectively against many droids that he cuts down during the course of a battle. In comparison to many other Jedi, Mace Windu uses the Force to amplify his natural human abilities to become a weapon himself. As we've seen in the 2003 Clone Wars, which is hinted to be at least partially canon, Windu on Dantooine punches through super battle droids. We have also seen a regular clone trooper unfortunately try to do the same thing, break his hand, scream, and then get gunned down. Mace Windu is also really well versed in some of the more rare Force abilities. He was able to use Force meditation and was able to sense shatter points. Shatter points can be best described as key moments that can be easily fractured and create massive change. And Mace Windu was able to use Shatterpoint simply to break apart different things that he saw weaknesses in, and also dictate the tide of the battle. Count Dooku himself is no slouch when it comes to his special abilities in the Force. While he is obviously a duelist that prefers to use his lightsaber, and who wouldn't in his case, he does use the Force to a great extent during the duels himself. He's able to simultaneously fight people off with his lightsaber, while also use his free hand to choke, push, pull, or even use Force Lightning against his enemies. Like many others said, Dooku does have a preference for using Force Lightning. We saw how easily he takes down a charging Padawan Anakin, and how he uses it throughout the Clone Wars to break down this man's body again and again. So, he does seem to really enjoy it. Interestingly, Dooku's able to push and make people fly in the air through just the use of his Force Lightning. You could consider it as maybe using a bit of telekinesis there, but maybe the raw strength of his lightning is just that powerful. In comparison to lightsaber combat, when it comes to the Force abilities of both these users, it's a little bit more of a tighter contest. Arguably, you could say that maybe Count Dooku was equal or even better than Mace Windu in using Force abilities when he was still a Jedi and much younger, but I'm gonna have to give this round to Mace Windu. I think Mace uses the Force in a similar way to amplify his body, like Count Dooku does, but whereas Count Dooku uses the Force to keep himself very spry and agile for his advanced age, Mace Windu uses the Force to make himself a living weapon, using his bare hands to shred through a B2 battle droid, which I don't think we've necessarily seen Count Dooku do or would ever be willing to do. It also does not help that he has the ability to use battle meditation and shatter points, which would be very effective and useful in a combat duel. For this third category, this will be on other interesting traits that could affect this duel. When it comes to other abilities, I do want to put a highlight on the vocabulary and the diplomacy of these two fighters. Mace Windu is a bit more of a reluctant diplomat, but he's able to use his diplomatic skills, especially more and more as the war goes on, especially in the case of Ryloth and eventually the assassination attempt on Count Dooku. He's not necessarily the most empathic person in the Jedi Order, but he has a way of at least bringing people together for a unified cause. He does have the ability to give grand speeches and project his strength while also giving his enemies a chance to leave and be dismayed without being put at harm, but I don't think it stands anywhere near the abilities that Count Dooku has. Count Dooku is a Count of Serrano. He has a whole backstory about being taken from the planet Serrano, having a almost royal-like lineage, and having an entire planet under his control if he wanted to go back, which he eventually does. And we see in the Clone Wars and in the years before the Clone Wars how he becomes a very adept and manipulative diplomat and politician. He's the head of the CIS and he's able to bring so many systems to under his control because he's charming, he's effective when he speaks, and it's hard to disrespect him for his extremely long career on both sides of the aisle. The Jedi, including Mace Windu himself, make it a point that they could hardly believe or even consider Dooku to be someone who turned to the dark side because he is just that effective and charming with his language as a political leader. When it comes to dueling, Mace Windu doesn't necessarily talk. He's a lot more of a grunt, focusing on the battle, trying to find the shatter points, trying to take advantage and use his natural skills that are amplified by the Force. But with Count Dooku, the man's mouth is constantly running. He gets under everyone's skin, most notably Obi-Wan Kenobi and especially Anakin. And in the case of Obi-Wan, he does always throw him off his game, and with Anakin, he makes Anakin push too hard and leave himself exposed. As a duelist who's also focused on efficient lightsaber form and is still able to use the Force with his other free hand, being able to talk at the same time and making his opponents feel dismayed or disgruntled or off balance is a pretty interesting trait to have. Alright, now let's get into the scenario that I have brewing up for this versus match. In a versus match between Mace Windu and Count Dooku, I would consider this battle to take place just before the Clone Wars or during the Clone Wars. Yes, there is a bit of a 30-year age gap between these two human fighters, but Count Dooku's skill with the lightsaber and his ability to fight off much younger opponents makes this match pretty fair and even, in my opinion. Being so skilled in diplomacy and manipulation, I would think that somehow, someway, Count Dooku would be able to bring this battle to his home planet of Serrano. More than likely, the ideal location for Count Dooku in this fight would be at Castle Sereno, which we have seen in the Clone Wars in his duels against Asajj Ventress, Savage Opress, and the Night Sisters. I envision Mace Windu taking on this battle even in the enemy territory because we've already seen Mace do really well in many combat situations that he's very unfamiliar with the terrain. For example, he comes onto Geonosis with very little information but is still able to handle himself in a very chaotic arena and destroy many battle droids and cut down Jango Fett. In the cramped hallways of Palpatine's office, he's able to withstand the initial onslaught of the Force Scream and is pretty easily able to navigate throughout the landscape, even with Sidious jumping across platforms, pushing him, pulling him to different areas of the battle. Even though Mace Windu would be walking into the enemy territory and giving a huge advantage immediately to Count Dooku, I don't think he'd be completely unprepared. Again, he would use battle meditation to amplify his focus and concentration before the fight and make sure that he's completely balanced before he faces Count Dooku. And you'd probably come to this battle against Dooku just before a shatter point could be fractured and give him an advantage in the fight. With the shatter point activated, some of the initial advantages that Count Dooku has probably will fade away, but I think Count Dooku would also try to employ a fight in the darkness. As we've seen with Castle Serrano in the Clone Wars and the Geonosis fight against Anakin, as well as the fight on Naboo against Anakin again in the Clone Wars, Dooku is very capable fighting in the darkness. He doesn't really need much light and uses only his lightsaber to guide him, and his precision strikes and slashes would give him an advantage and allow him to conserve his energy even if he's not able to keep track of Mace Windu throughout the fight. And as I've noted before, Mace Windu does have a strong amount of reverence for Count Dooku and his abilities, at least until the Clone Wars begins. You can't deny how good Count Dooku is, even at such an advanced age. So I think he'd proceed with caution again after making sure that the shatter point could be achieved at the optimal time. Once the optimal time comes, then we might see him use the Force to increase his speed, his jumping ability, and his kicks and punches, which would be pretty effective against a much older man. I would see most of the initial fight going to Dooku, because Dooku, again, would be on his home territory. He'd be able to use the darkness to his advantage and use his precise cutting and slashing of the Makashi form against Mace Windu, who would be mostly on the defensive and waiting for the shatter point to fracture and activate for him. Dooku himself would definitely be aware of Mace Windu's shatter point being a tactical advantage for himself, so he would try to press this battle by using both his dueling abilities and Force Lightning, Force Push, Force Telekinesis, and whatever he could. While Mace Windu is pretty aggressive as a fighter, and he does teeter on the edge of the dark side using Form 7 of Vapad, Dooku would still definitely try to push and neg him by talking constantly in his ear, possibly about how the war effort is going, about how the Jedi are becoming more ingrained into politics and falling under the control of Palpatine, and so on and so forth. A big point about Mace is that he doesn't like how the Jedi Order is clouded and becoming more and more of a political pawn in the Great War of the Clone Wars. So maybe Mace, despite his concentration, would become a little unnerved by the amount of talking, the precise strikes, and the constant barrages of force lightning and pushes in the shadowy and dark hallways of Castle Serrano. However, once the Shatter Point is activated, I think the game completely changes. Then we'll see Mace Windu start punching and kicking and breaking apart any advantages and defenses that Count Dooku has. Count Dooku would definitely have to rely more on his lightsaber combat alone, which should still be fine, but this becomes a lot more of an even fight. The problem that will arise for Dooku after the Shatter Point is activated and the Force changed in tactics to defense only is that the battle will start to drag on and become longer and longer and longer than he'd ever wanted it to be. As skilled as he is, as powerful as he is, as much as he uses his abilities, his cunning, his skills, his surrounding to amplify himself in a fight here, Dooku at the end of the day is an 80-year-old man. An 80-year-old man who has struggled and fought constantly on the battlefield against the best Jedi and against the best dark side users. And that has to have some sort of effect on his body. If we were to put this duel specifically more towards the end of the Clone Wars, when he's a little bit more battered and broken down after constant run-ins with Anakin and Obi-Wan, Mace Windu might be able to drag out the fight like he does against Palpatine and take advantage here. I could easily see Mace Windu submit Count Dooku at the very end. However, I do think that waiting for the Shatter Point could take a long time against someone so skilled and capable as Dooku. Waiting out for the Shatter Point to be able to take advantage of the fight may not be optimal against the greatest duelist of the era. Doesn't matter if he's not the strongest physically, the fact that he can cut and slash, keep hurling force lightning, force pushes against you, use his natural surroundings to his advantage, still leaves Dooku at a bigger advantage for an extended period of time against Mace Windu. In the case that Mace Windu is able to activate the Shatter Point and start dragging out the fight to the point that Dooku is tired and beginning to worry about his chances against Mace Windu, he does have a trick card up his sleeve. While he doesn't necessarily have to run away, what he can do is run to the box, which was also created and stored on Serrano by criminal mastermind Moralo Evil. And we've seen the box on Serrano during the Clone Wars, when it was used to test many different bounty hunters, including Cad Bane, Embo, Obi-Wan when he was disguised as Rico Hardin, and several others before they were eliminated down to the final 5, who would then be used in a Chancellor Palpatine kidnapping scheme. If push comes to shove, I could see Dooku making his way towards the box and then hiding for a bit, forcing Mace Windu into part of the contraption where he could then use the controls to activate it and completely change the landscape to his advantage. As good as Mace Windu is to adjusting to enemy and foreign climates and environments, I think the box being so radically designed to cause as much havoc and destruction and pain would put Mace Windu at an extreme disadvantage, and being such a late and drawn out fight might also leave him a bit tired when he has to suddenly adjust to Count Dooku being able to use these boxes and weapons and systems to his advantage to suddenly shift the tide of the battle in his favor. If the box is used, it's game over for Mace Windu, in my opinion. Therefore, with all the advantages and with the initial advantage of being on Castle Serrano, I think Dooku would win this fight. If we move this to somewhere like the open plains of Dantooine, maybe Dooku does go down. But I still think Dooku's abilities to use all of his abilities simultaneously in a way that Mace Windu himself probably can't do gives him this battle. So at the end of the day, I do have to declare Mace Windu as the loser and Count Dooku as the winner. Well, that's the end of this first Versus episode. If you guys enjoy this series, again, I really want to continue this and give you guys my own thoughts on my years of being a Star Wars fan and just thinking about this stuff on a daily basis. If you enjoyed a lot of what this video was and enjoyed the format, let me know down below. If you see that there's some things that maybe could be changed or some additions that you want to see, I'll definitely take them into consideration. I know that for some of you guys, my decision with going with Count Dooku at the very end might not be the popular one. Maybe it is. But if you think this could go a totally different way, again, let me know down below in the comments. I definitely will respond and let you guys know my own opinions on what you guys wrote. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to us and like this video and comment down below. We put out new videos at least twice a week, and we have daily discussion polls on our community tab, as well as on our Instagram most times during the week. If you enjoyed listening to us on our audio podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and so many different podcast platforms. If you haven't already, also make sure to follow us on our social media. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. See you guys next time.